about the crowds. Well, at this time in the show, we always show you something that's trending on social media. How about this? You couldn't get
Alex Eala's pre-tournament press conference at the 2026 Australian Open drew an astonishing 171,000 YouTube views, while the world now. 1's managed just 9,000. The difference had nothing to do with rankings. Eala, a 20-year-old Filipina, would go on to lose in the first round, yet she was already capturing global attention in a way few players could. By the time Wimbledon arrived, the contrast had become even more striking, the world now. One stepped onto the grass defending her reputation, while the no. 29 seed carried the hopes of an entire nation. If you followed this journey since the Miami semifinal, the Junior US Open, or long before the tennis world fully recognized her name, then you're exactly where you belong. Before we dive deeper, subscribe and join the growing Filipino community that believed in this story from the very beginning. And for a moment, forget the Mallorca headlines and the ranking milestones. 5 days before Wimbledon, Eala claimed her first grass court title in Birmingham. Just 2 weeks earlier, she had stunned world no. 2 Elena Rybakina in Berlin and powered her way to the semifinals. Those results weren't just impressive, they were the beginning of something much bigger.
An absolutely stunning performance from Alexandra Eala.
On Saturday, June 27th, Alex Eala spent 2 hours practicing on the famous Aorangi grass courts before officially arriving at Wimbledon as the first Filipino player ever to be seeded at a Grand Slam. It was a historic moment, not just for her career but for Philippine tennis. On the other side of the draw, however, the atmosphere surrounding world no. 1's Arena Sabalenka was very different. While Eala faced questions about representing her country and inspiring a new generation, Sabalenka was answering questions about her own struggles. On June 27th, The Guardian published an interview focusing on the pressure and scrutiny surrounding the top-ranked player. Just days earlier, Reuters had reported Sabalenka's admission that she had fallen into what she described as a deep, dark hole following her painful French Open defeat, a loss that left her openly reflecting on the emotional toll of competing at the very highest level.
Just wanna quit tennis right now, but we'll see. We'll see in a few days. Hopefully I'll get back.
I just want to quit tennis right now. Those were Aryna Sabalenka's own words after one of the toughest losses of her career. By the time Wimbledon began, British media described her pre-tournament press conference as a grilling, with the world no. 1 forced to answer questions about her emotions, her image, and the pressure surrounding her. Sabalenka never publicly mentioned Alex Eala or the wave of Filipino support following the rising star across the tour. Yet that silence became part of the story itself. While the world's top-ranked player was defending her personality, the no. 29 seed was being asked which Tagalog phrase she would want engraved on the Wimbledon trophy. The numbers explain why. At the 2026 Australian Open, the BBC highlighted that Eala's pre-tournament press conference attracted 171,000 YouTube views. Carlos Alcaraz drew around 29,000, Coco Gauff's around 29,000, and Sabalenka's just 9,000. The most watched WTA player before the season's opening Grand Slam wasn't the world no. 1, it was an unseeded 20-year-old Filipina who had not yet won a main draw match in Melbourne. Then came the crowds. BBC reporters described thousands of Filipino fans creating a massive bottleneck outside Court 6, a venue with a capacity of only 1,500 spectators, as lines stretched hundreds of yards through Melbourne Park. BBC Radio 5 Live's Karthik Nanasagaram summed up the surprise perfectly. I couldn't believe the queues. Who's on the scheduling team? Even the Australian Open acknowledged the miscalculation, posting on X that it would take it as a learning after underestimating Eala's popularity. By the time Wimbledon arrived a few months later, the message had been received. Alex Eala entered the championships as the no. 29 seed, becoming the first Filipino in the 147-year history of Grand Slam tennis to be seeded at a major. This was no longer simply the story of a promising young player, it was the arrival of a phenomenon. This wasn't just a personal milestone. It was a structural adjustment by the most traditional institution in tennis. Wimbledon wasn't simply rewarding Alex Eala's ranking, it was acknowledging a movement that the sport could no longer ignore. Then came June 22, 2026, and the Lexus Birmingham Open final. Eala battled past Nicola Bartonkova 5-7, 6-3, 7-5 to capture her first WTA grasscourt title. During the trophy ceremony, she did something even more memorable than lifting the championship. Before thanking her academy or her coaching team, she turned toward the crowd and spoke directly to the Filipino fans in Tagalog. Maraming salamat mga kababayan sa suporta. Home is the people, not the place. In English, thank you, my countrymen, for the support. Home is the people, not the place. For millions of Filipinos, that wasn't just a victory speech, it was a declaration. It was the moment the story stopped being about a rising tennis player with passionate supporters and became a champion publicly celebrating the people who had carried her every step of the way. If you've been telling friends for the past 2 years that Alex Eala wasn't just another promising prospect, that this wasn't hype but history, Birmingham was your proof. You weren't early. You were right, and the tennis had already backed up the belief. Just 2 weeks earlier in Berlin, Eala erased any lingering doubts about whether she belonged among the elite. She defeated world No. 2 Elena Rybakina in the round of 16, followed it with a quarter-final win over Elina Svitolina, and reached the semi-finals before falling to Linda Noskova 6-2, 6-4. By then, the crowds were no longer cheering for potential. They were cheering for a genuine contender who had just taken down one of the best players in the world on grass. Meanwhile, on the other side of the tennis world, the narrative around the world now. One was moving in the opposite direction. Aryna Sabalenka's emotional comments about falling into a deep, dark hole after Roland Garros, combined with intense media scrutiny heading into Wimbledon, painted the picture of a player trying to protect her image and rebuild her confidence. Eala, by contrast, arrived carrying the hopes of an entire nation. Sometimes the clearest sign that a sport has changed isn't found in rankings or trophies, it's found in the people who have spent decades watching it. When the sport itself wants to know whether something has changed, it doesn't ask the fans, it listens to the people who have spent decades inside the game. One of those voices is Alex Eala, the former British No. 1, current Great Britain Billie Jean King Cup captain, and longtime BBC tennis analyst. Watching the scenes outside Court 6 at the Australian Open, she didn't respond with polite praise. She responded with disbelief, openly questioning the scheduling after thousands of fans packed the area to watch Alex Eala. Coming from a former national No. 1 on BBC Radio during a Grand Slam, that wasn't a throwaway comment. It was an acknowledgement that one of tennis' biggest events had underestimated the audience Eala was bringing with her, and Alex Eala wasn't the only respected voice saying it. Greg Rusedski, the former US Open finalist and world No. 4, predicted that Wimbledon could become Eala's breakthrough Grand Slam, pointing not only to her improving game but also to the extraordinary energy generated by Filipino supporters. When multiple former top players, broadcasters, and analysts independently arrive at the same conclusion, the conversation moves beyond opinion. It becomes recognition. The Wimbledon draw may have given Alex Eala the biggest opportunity of her career. Aryna Sabalenka landed in the top quarter of the draw, while Eala found herself in the third quarter alongside Iga Swiatek and the returning Serena Williams. That meant the two biggest storylines in women's tennis couldn't collide until the championship match. If Eala could get past her opening round opponent, Renata Zarazua, a second-round meeting with Serena Williams would suddenly become possible. For a player carrying the hopes of a nation, it was the kind of path that could transform a promising tournament into a historic one. That's what makes this moment so remarkable. Sabalenka isn't losing on the court. She's still the world No. 1, but away from the matches, Eala has been winning a different battle. She has drawn larger crowds, generated more online attention, and forced tournament organizers to rethink scheduling because of the demand to watch her play. Those are signals that can't be measured by rankings alone. Zoom out even further, and the story becomes bigger than either player. Modern tennis has long revolved around Europe and the traditional Anglo-American power centers. The Philippines, with a population of more than 117 million people, has rarely been represented at the highest level of the sport. Alex Eala has changed that equation. She hasn't just introduced a new contender into women's tennis, she has brought an entirely new audience with her, and the biggest tournaments in the world are now learning how to keep up. The impact stretches far beyond the Philippines itself. The country has a global diaspora, including hundreds of thousands of Filipinos living in the United Kingdom, many working in the NHS and other essential sectors. For many of them, this Wimbledon has been circled on the calendar ever since the draw was released. That's not a niche audience anymore. It's a fanbase the WTA has rarely had the opportunity to engage on this scale. Now look at what's ahead. First comes Wimbledon, beginning with a first-round match against Renata Zarazua. Win that, and a blockbuster second-round showdown with Serena Williams could be waiting.